How to rebuild yourself like a ruthless strategist. Machiavelli.
The death of your old self. There comes a point in every person's life when they are forced to face an uncomfortable truth. The version of you that exists right now may not be enough to survive the future. Not because you are worthless, not because you are incapable, but because the world does not reward innocence, hesitation, or emotional weakness for very long. At some point, life teaches every man and every woman the same brutal lesson. Good intentions are not enough. Kindness without awareness is dangerous. Potential without discipline is useless. And a soft mind in a hard world is often the first thing to be broken. Most people never truly rebuild themselves. They only decorate their wounds. They buy motivational books. They post quotes. They promise themselves they'll change next Monday. They say this year will be different. They tell themselves they are healing. But underneath the polished language, underneath the fake positivity, underneath the carefully edited social media masks, they are still ruled by fear, still controlled by approval, still manipulated by emotion, still trapped in the same weak patterns that ruined them before. And that is why they remain exactly where they are. Same pain, same confusion, same excuses, same emotional chaos. But Machiavelli understood something most people are too naive to accept. If you want to survive, rise, and command your life, you cannot remain the same person. You must become harder, not cruel for no reason, not evil for entertainment, not heartless for attention, but strategic. Because the truth is, the world is not only made of honest people, it is not only made of noble intentions, it is not only made of fairness. The world is filled with hidden motives, silent competition, unspoken power games, calculated betrayal, manipulation dressed as friendship, envy disguised as support, and weakness disguised as kindness. If you do not learn how the game is played, you will spend your life being played by others. And that is where rebuilding begins, not in motivation, not in comfort, but in disillusionment. The moment you finally stop seeing life the way you wish it was and begin seeing it the way it actually is. That moment is painful, because illusions are comforting. It is comforting to believe everyone means well. It is comforting to believe effort always gets rewarded. It is comforting to believe loyalty is always returned. It is comforting to believe love protects you from betrayal. But life eventually tears these fantasies apart. And when it does, you have two choices. You can become bitter, or you can become dangerously wise. This is the birth of the ruthless strategist, not someone who destroys others for pleasure, but someone who has finally learned to stop destroying themselves through ignorance. And the first thing you must understand is this: your old identity must die. You cannot rebuild yourself while protecting the same mindset that made you weak. You cannot evolve while remaining emotionally addicted to the version of you that keeps sabotaging your future. You cannot become powerful while still behaving like someone who needs constant validation, constant reassurance, constant permission, and constant emotional rescue. That version of you must go. And for many people, this is the hardest part, because people don't just fear pain, they fear identity death. They fear what happens when they no longer recognize themselves, when they are no longer the nice one, no longer the people pleaser, no longer the one who always understands everyone, no longer the one who tolerates disrespect to keep peace, no longer the one who stays silent to be accepted. Because if they stop being that person, who are they? And the answer is, they become free. Freedom is not always beautiful in the beginning. Sometimes freedom feels like loneliness. Sometimes freedom feels like guilt. Sometimes freedom feels like disappointing people who benefited from your weakness. And that is why so many people never reach it, because becoming stronger often means becoming less convenient. The weak version of you was easier for people to manage, easier to manipulate, easier to guilt trip, easier to use, easier to control. People often say they want the best for you, but many only want the version of you that does not threaten their comfort. The moment you become more disciplined, they call you distant. The moment you stop explaining yourself, they call you cold. The moment you stop tolerating nonsense, they call you proud. The moment you become less emotionally available for foolishness, they say you've changed. And they are right. You have changed. That is the whole point. Rebuilding yourself is not about becoming more acceptable. It is about becoming more effective. Because the truth is, your old self was likely built out of survival, not wisdom.
You learned to please because you feared rejection. You learned to stay quiet because you feared conflict. You learned to over-explain because you feared misunderstanding. You learned to be endlessly available because you feared being forgotten. You learned to tolerate disrespect because you feared being alone. But survival patterns are not always strength. Sometimes they are chains. And if you never question them, you will call your prison personality. That is one of the most dangerous mistakes a person can make. Because when weakness becomes familiar, it starts to feel natural. You begin to say things like, "This is just how I am. I'm too emotional. I'm too nice. I can't help overthinking. I always care too much. I just trust people easily." No, those are not permanent truths. Those are unexamined habits, and habits can be destroyed. This is what Machiavelli rebuilding demands. Not fake confidence, not empty affirmations, not spiritual bypassing, not pretending everything is okay. It demands ruthless self-observation. You must become honest enough to study yourself like an enemy. Look at your mind without mercy. Where are you predictable? Where are you emotionally weak? What triggers you easily? What makes you desperate? What makes you seek approval? What causes you to lose discipline? What makes you abandon your standards? What kind of attention can derail your focus? What kind of loneliness can make you lower your value? What kind of flattery can blind your judgment? Until you can answer these questions honestly, you are not rebuilding. You are just performing self-improvement. And performance is useless in private war, because that is what rebuilding really is, a private war against your undisciplined self. Most people think their greatest enemies are outside of them. Their haters, their critics, their ex, their difficult family, their toxic friends, their circumstances. But often the greatest enemy is the version of themselves that keeps handing power away. The self that talks too much, trusts too fast, feels too deeply without thinking clearly, moves impulsively, exposes plans too early, gets attached too quickly, forgives too cheaply, and repeats pain because familiarity feels safer than change. That self is not evil, but it is dangerous, because it keeps leading you into avoidable suffering. And until you become ruthless with that version of yourself, life will continue to humiliate you. You will continue to lose opportunities because you lack self-control. You will continue to attract disrespect because you lack standards. You will continue to get manipulated because you lacked awareness. You will continue to feel unlucky, when in reality, you were simply unguarded. This is not meant to shame you. It is meant to wake you up, because there is power in finally admitting, "I cannot build a better life with the same mind that keeps sabotaging it." That sentence changes everything. Because once you stop romanticizing your weakness, you become capable of transformation. And transformation is never soft. Every real birth is violent in some way, not always physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. To become someone stronger, you must grieve who you used to be. You must let go of old habits that once comforted you, old relationships that once validated you, old emotional addictions that once gave you identity, old excuses that once protected your ego. And yes, that hurts, because even painful versions of ourselves can become familiar homes. And human beings often cling to familiar pain rather than face unfamiliar power. That is why so many remain trapped, not because they are incapable of change, but because change threatens the emotional structure they have built their identity around. To rebuild yourself like a ruthless strategist, you must accept a terrifying but liberating principle. Your feelings are not always your allies. This is where many people fail. They worship emotion. They let every feeling become a command. If they feel tired, they stop. If they feel rejected, they collapse. If they feel uncertain, they hesitate. If they feel lonely, they lower standards. If they feel uncomfortable, they retreat. And then they wonder why their lives never change. But Machiavelli would tell you, emotion without control is a liability, because people who cannot govern themselves cannot govern anything. Not a relationship, not a business, not a future, not a mission, not even their own peace. You do not need to become emotionless. That is foolish. You need to be emotionally trained. There is a difference. An untrained mind reacts. A trained mind calculates. An untrained mind seeks relief. A trained mind seeks results. An untrained mind confuses feelings with facts. A trained mind knows that discomfort is often the doorway to transformation. This is why rebuilding requires silence. Not because silence is aesthetic, not because mystery is trendy, but because silence is where self-observation becomes possible. Most people are too noisy to hear themselves, too distracted to study their own patterns, too overstimulated to think clearly, too addicted to entertainment to confront their emptiness. So they stay busy, they scroll, they gossip, they chase stimulation, they run from stillness, because stillness reveals truth, and truth is not always flattering. In silence, you begin to notice how desperate you've been for attention, how easily your confidence depends on other people's behavior, how much of your personality is actually defense mechanisms, how often you betray yourself just to feel chosen, how often you abandon your own standards for temporary emotional relief. This is where the reconstruction begins, not in public, not in performance, but in brutal private honesty. The strategist is born in silence. When you begin to watch yourself instead of just being yourself unconsciously, you gain power, because what is seen can be changed, and what is unconscious controls you. That is why self-awareness is not just healing, it is weaponry. You cannot master what you refuse to observe. You cannot conquer patterns you keep romanticizing. You cannot become formidable while remaining emotionally asleep. And so the first stage of your rebirth is this: detach from the false self. The false self is the version of you built for approval, survival, comfort, and emotional dependency. It is not the real you. It is the adaptive you. And adaptation is useful until it starts limiting your destiny. The real you is buried beneath the conditioning, beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, beneath the performance, beneath the emotional habits that made you acceptable but not powerful. To find that self, you must ask dangerous questions. Who am I when I stop trying to be liked? Who am I when I stop explaining myself? Who am I when I stop fearing other people's opinions? Who am I when I stop making decisions from loneliness? Who am I when I stop negotiating my value? Who am I when I stop needing applause to feel worthy? Most people never ask these questions because the answers would force them to change. But if you are serious about rebuilding, you must ask them anyway, because the ruthless strategist does not seek comfort, they seek clarity. And clarity is expensive. It will cost you illusions. It will cost you old attachments. It will cost you the emotional identities you've outgrown. It may even cost you relationships that only survive because you were smaller. But what it gives you in return is priceless. Self-command, emotional precision, inner authority, psychological independence, and the ability to move through life with less confusion, less chaos, and less self-betrayal. That is where real power begins, not when the world notices you, but when you finally stop being easy to control. And if you are willing to continue, then understand this. The death of your old self is not the tragedy. It is the initiation.
How to think like a ruthless strategist. If the first stage of transformation is the death of your old self, then the second stage is far more dangerous. Because now you are no longer merely trying to heal. Now you are learning how to think differently. And this is where most people fail. Because changing behavior is one thing, but changing your mental architecture, the way you interpret people, power, conflict, opportunity, emotion, and survival, that requires something much deeper than motivation. It requires a complete rewiring of perception. And perception is everything. Because the way you see the world determines the way the world affects you. A naive person suffers differently from a strategist. A reactive person loses differently from a composed one. A sentimental person gets used differently from someone who has learned to observe before they attach. This is what Machiavelli understood better than most. People are not destroyed only by bad luck. They are often destroyed by misreading reality. They trust appearances. They believe words too quickly. They assume intentions without evidence. They reveal too much too early. They move emotionally instead of strategically. And then when consequences arrive, they call it betrayal, bad luck, or injustice. But often what they experienced was not merely betrayal. It was the price of miscalculation. That truth is hard to swallow because it forces you to admit something painful. Many of your wounds were not just caused by evil people. Some were caused by your inability to see clearly. And if you want to rebuild yourself like a ruthless strategist, that is where you must begin. Stop reacting to life emotionally. Start reading it strategically. The average person moves through life half asleep. They respond to tone, not motive, charm, not character, attention, not intention, chemistry, not compatibility, noise, not truth. And because of that, they are constantly being moved by forces they do not understand. A compliment changes their standards. A little affection clouds their judgment. A little validation makes them ignore red flags. A little rejection destroys their confidence. A little discomfort makes them quit. This is not power. This is psychological vulnerability. And the world is merciless towards psychologically vulnerable people. Not always openly, but quietly, subtly, strategically. Because people can sense when you are easy to influence. They can sense when your emotions govern your choices. They can sense when loneliness makes you negotiable. They can sense when flattery can buy your trust. They can sense when your fear of conflict makes you tolerate disrespect. And once that is sensed, you become readable. And if you are readable, you are controllable. That is why one of the first laws of becoming a ruthless strategist is this: never let your emotions become public leverage. This does not mean suppressing everything. It means becoming disciplined enough that your inner storms do not become someone else's tool. Because once people know exactly what triggers you, what hurts you, what excites you, what makes you insecure, what makes you desperate, they no longer need force to control you. They only need access. That is why silence is power. Not because silence is mysterious in some romantic, dramatic way, but because silence protects your center. The more people know about your emotional weaknesses, the easier you are to move. That is why strategists do not reveal themselves carelessly. They do not explain every thought. They do not announce every plan. They do not expose every wound. They do not make every emotion available for public consumption. Because once everything about you is exposed, you lose the advantage of unpredictability. And unpredictability is power. Most people reveal themselves too quickly because they crave intimacy, validation, or connection. They think transparency automatically creates trust. But trust is not built through reckless openness. Trust is built through tested consistency. And until someone has proven their intentions, their discipline, their loyalty, and their discretion, you should not be handing them the blueprint to your mind. This is not paranoia. This is wisdom. Because many people do not study you in order to understand you. They study you in order to position themselves around you, to know what to say, when to appear, how to gain influence, how to trigger emotion, how to earn access,
how to control your perception. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Not everyone who listens to you cares about you. Some are gathering data. And if you are too emotionally hungry to notice the difference, you will repeatedly place your vulnerabilities in the hands of people who never earned them. That is why a strategist learns to watch before they trust, to observe before they attach, to analyze before they commit. Because in a world full of performance, the ability to read beneath the surface is one of the rarest forms of power. And this is where your mind must change forever. Do not judge people by what they say. Judge them by what their patterns reveal. Words are cheap. Words are often costume. Words are often seduction. Words are often manipulation dressed in sincerity. People will say they care, say they support you, say they respect you, say they are loyal, say they are honest, say they want the best for you. And yet their actions will quietly tell a different story. This is where weak people get trapped. They are hypnotized by language. They hear what they want to hear. They cling to promises because promises feel emotionally satisfying. But the strategist does not fall in love with words. The strategist studies patterns. What does this person do consistently? How do they behave when they do not need anything from you? How do they act when you are no longer useful? How do they respond when they are challenged, ignored, or denied access? How do they treat people beneath them? How do they act under pressure? How do they handle boundaries? How do they react when they lose control of the narrative? These questions reveal more than any speech ever will. Because under pressure, masks slip. And that is when truth becomes visible. A strategist understands that most people are not lying all the time. They are simply fragmented. They say what sounds right, feel what feels convenient, promise what serves the moment, and then later act according to their real nature. This is why you must stop listening to potential and start watching consistency. Potential is seductive. Potential is the fantasy of who someone could become. But consistency is reality. And reality is what determines whether someone should be trusted, respected, or kept at a distance. This one principle alone can save you years of unnecessary pain. Because many people do not get hurt by monsters. They get hurt by ignoring evidence. They see the red flags. They feel the inconsistency. They notice the manipulation. They sense the imbalance. But because they are emotionally invested in what they hope is true, they betray their own perception. That is one of the most expensive forms of self-betrayal. To see clearly and still choose illusion because illusion feels better. The ruthless strategist refuses that weakness. They train themselves to value truth over comfort, even when truth is lonely, even when truth is painful, even when truth ruins fantasy. Because fantasy can feel warm while quietly destroying your future. And one of the greatest fantasies people destroy themselves with is this: the belief that everyone deserves access to your energy. No, they do not. This is where strategic detachment becomes necessary. Many people live emotionally overexposed lives. They are too available, too reachable, too responsive, too explainable, too emotionally accessible. And then they wonder why they feel drained, disrespected, distracted, and psychologically invaded. Because every time you make yourself too available to the wrong people, you leak power. Your attention is power. Your emotional bandwidth is power. Your time is power. Your presence is power. And if you hand these things out carelessly, you should not be surprised when your life begins to feel scattered. The strategist protects access, not because they are arrogant, but because they understand that what is constantly available is rarely respected. Scarcity creates value. Distance creates perspective. Silence creates uncertainty. And uncertainty often reveals more about people than constant closeness ever will. Pull back from people and watch what surfaces. Some will respect your space. Some will become resentful. Some will panic because they were feeding on your availability. Some will suddenly show effort they never showed before. Some will disappear because access, not you, was what they valued. This is why distance is diagnostic. It reveals who is connected to you and who is simply attached to your convenience. That is powerful information. And the strategist collects information more than they collect emotional assumptions. This is one of the biggest differences between ordinary minds and strategic minds. Ordinary people seek reassurance. Strategic people seek evidence. Ordinary people want to feel safe quickly. Strategic people want to know what is true. And truth often takes time. That is why patience is a weapon. People who rush emotionally are easy to trap. They commit too early, trust too fast, speak too much, reveal too much, expect too much, and then suffer because they moved before understanding the terrain. But a strategist never rushes what can be observed. They understand that time exposes what charm can temporarily hide. Give people time and they will reveal themselves. Give situations time and hidden motives emerge. Give tension time and truth surfaces. This is why restraint is one of the most underrated forms of power. Most people think power is loud, aggressive, dominant, explosive, confrontational. But true power is often quiet. It is the ability to pause when others expect reaction, to remain unreadable when others expect emotional exposure, to remain composed when others are trying to provoke you, to hold your ground without needing to announce your strength. This kind of restraint terrifies manipulative people, because manipulative people survive through reaction. They need emotional access. They need predictability. They need your insecurity to stay visible. They need your neediness to remain active. They need your ego to stay triggerable. But when you become emotionally disciplined, they lose the buttons they used to press. And that is when the power dynamic changes. This is why one of the greatest acts of self-reconstruction is this: become difficult to provoke. Not passive, not weak, not avoidant, but difficult to move. If someone can ruin your peace with a sentence, they have too much power. If someone can derail your focus with inconsistency, they have too much power. If someone can manipulate your self-worth through attention and withdrawal, they have too much power. If someone can bait you into emotional exposure every time, they have too much power. A ruthless strategist does not surrender control of their internal world so cheaply. They understand that the person who controls their reactions often controls the direction of the interaction. And this is where emotional discipline becomes essential. You must train yourself to delay reaction. Not every message deserves an immediate reply. Not every offense deserves a confrontation. Not every misunderstanding deserves clarification. Not every challenge deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your defense. This alone will change your life. Because many people are not suffering from lack of opportunity. They are suffering from wasted emotional expenditure. Too much energy spent explaining. Too much energy spent defending. Too much energy spent proving. Too much energy spent reacting. Too much energy spent trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding them. That is a losing game. The strategist does not waste power trying to convince people who benefit from not understanding. They conserve energy for what actually matters: building, positioning, observing, preparing, executing. This is another brutal truth Machiavelli would respect. You do not need to be understood by everyone. You need to be effective. That sentence can free you from years of emotional slavery, because so many people live for perception. They want everyone to know their intentions, everyone to
How to read people and master social power. If rebuilding yourself begins with killing your old weakness, and thinking like a strategist teaches you how to govern your own mind, then the next battlefield is unavoidable: people. Because no matter how disciplined, self-aware, or emotionally composed you become, if you do not understand human nature, you will still be vulnerable. You can have ambition and still be manipulated. You can have talent and still be sabotaged. You can have vision and still be surrounded by people whose presence quietly poisons your eyes. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Not everyone around you wants to see you become powerful. Some like your company, but not your growth. Some admire your personality, but not your potential. Some support your dreams, only as long as those dreams remained theoretical. Because the moment your evolution becomes real, the moment your discipline sharpens, the moment your confidence stops being performative and starts becoming embodied, you begin to trigger something in people they rarely admit: comparison. And comparison is where hidden resentment is born. Most people do not openly hate power. They hate what your power forces them to confront within themselves. Your discipline reminds them of their excuses. Your standards remind them of their compromises. Your silence reminds them of their need for noise. Your self-respect reminds them of the disrespect they tolerate. Your progress reminds them of the life they keep postponing. And rather than face that discomfort honestly, many will subtly resist your transformation. Not always dramatically. Not always with obvious betrayal. Sometimes through jokes. Sometimes through doubt. Sometimes through emotional withdrawal. Sometimes through passive discouragement. Sometimes through fake concern. Sometimes through strategic absence when support actually matters. This is why one of the first rules of social power is this: learn to recognize who enjoys your presence and who benefits from your weakness. These are not always the same people. Some people like you because you are easy to access, easy to vent to, easy to borrow from, easy to emotionally dump on, easy to keep around when they need attention, validation, convenience, or comfort. But the moment you become less available, less naive, less emotionally reachable, less willing to be used, their energy changes. And that shift reveals the truth. Because real connection survives boundaries. Exploitation does not. This is one of the most important tests in life. Watch what people do when you become harder to use. That one observation will save you from years of confusion. Because many people mistake familiarity for loyalty. They assume that because someone has been around for a long time, that person must be genuine. But time alone proves nothing. A parasite can stay attached for years. Longevity is not loyalty. Access is not love. Closeness is not sincerity. The strategist understands this. And because of that, They stop evaluating people based only on history, charm, or emotional intensity. They evaluate people based on one thing. How do they respond when they no longer have effortless access to you? That is when truth begins to emerge. Some will respect your evolution. Some will become insecure around it. Some will attempt to humble you. Some will become distant. Some will subtly compete. Some will provoke. Some will act like you changed for the worse, simply because you stopped being convenient. That is not accidental. That is human nature reacting to a power shift. And if you do not understand power shifts, you will personalize what is actually predictable. That is one of the great advantages of the strategist. They stop taking everything personally. They begin interpreting behavior structurally. They understand that people often behave according to their insecurities, desires, fears, and self-interest, not according to your worth. That does not mean your feelings are invalid. It means your interpretation becomes more intelligent. And intelligence is protection. Because once you understand that many behaviors are not random, you stop being shocked by what you should have expected. And expectation is power. This is where you must learn a principle Machiavelli would deeply respect. People are rarely moved by morality alone. They are moved by self-interest. This truth makes many people uncomfortable because it sounds cynical. But ignoring it does not make it less real. People often help when helping benefits their image, identity, emotional needs, convenience, status, or long-term position. People often stay when staying serves them. People often praise when praise costs them nothing. People often disappear when your needs become inconvenient. This does not mean all people are evil. It means all people have interests. And the strategist never forgets that. They understand that human beings are often a mixture of affection and self-preservation, care and calculation, warmth and ambition. That is why they never build their lives on blind assumptions of loyalty. They observe what incentives are operating beneath the surface. Who benefits from being close to you? Who loses something if you become stronger? Who becomes uncomfortable when you become less dependent? Who subtly thrives when you are confused, broken, emotionally available, or easy to influence? These are dangerous questions, but they reveal dangerous truths. Because not all enemies oppose you openly. Some prefer to remain near, to watch, to influence, to delay, to soften your edge, to keep you emotionally preoccupied, to drain your focus, to make sure you never fully become what you could be. That is why social power begins with one uncomfortable realization. Not everyone around you should have access to your inner world. This is where weak people often destroy themselves. They are too trusting with information, too generous with vulnerability, too open with dreams, too transparent with strategy, too expressive with insecurity. And then they are shocked when their openness is later used against them. But a strategist understands that information is never neutral. Information is leverage. The more someone knows about your fears, your patterns, your emotional wounds, your insecurities, your plans, your desperation, the more material they possess to influence you. This is why discretion is not coldness. It is self-protection. You do not owe everyone your story. You do not owe everyone your pain. You do not owe access to the unfinished parts of your mind. Some people are not meant to witness your construction process. Because not everyone who sees your foundation deserves to see your empire. And that leads to one of the most important skills in mastering people. Learn to recognize manipulation before it controls you. Manipulation is rarely dramatic at first. It is subtle. It often enters through emotion, through guilt, through pity, through flattery, through confusion, through urgency, through selective affection, through withdrawal, through mixed signals. That is why emotionally untrained people are so easy to control, because they are constantly reacting to emotional weather, instead of studying emotional strategy. And manipulators know this. They know that if they can stabilize your emotions, they can influence your decisions. This is why one of the oldest manipulation tactics is inconsistency. Give attention, then withdraw it. Offer closeness, then create distance. Show interest, then become cold. Give validation, then become unpredictable. Why does this work on so many people? Because inconsistency creates obsession in the emotionally unguarded. The mind begins searching for certainty, for reassurance, for explanation, for emotional closure. And in that search, people become easier to control.
They start overthinking, overgiving, over-explaining, over-pursuing. And before they realize it, they are no longer acting from strength. They are acting from emotional hunger. That is how many people lose power without noticing. Not through force, but through destabilization. This is why the strategist trains themselves to become extremely aware of emotional patterns. When someone's behavior repeatedly creates confusion, anxiety, self-doubt, urgency, guilt, or emotional imbalance, pause. Do not rush to excuse it. Do not immediately romanticize it. Do not instantly blame yourself. Study it. Because healthy energy may challenge you, but it does not chronically destabilize you. That distinction matters. Manipulation thrives where self-doubt is high and clarity is low. So the more grounded you become in yourself, the less manipulation becomes effective. This is why boundaries are not merely social preferences. They are instruments of power. A boundary is not just saying no. A boundary is a declaration of what kind of access will and will not be rewarded in your life. And weak people often struggle with boundaries because they are addicted to emotional approval. They fear being disliked. They fear disappointing others. They fear conflict. They fear being called selfish, cold, arrogant, difficult, or proud. But the strategist understands something most people take years to learn. Any boundary that costs you false relationships is doing its job. That sentence can change your life. Because boundaries are not meant to preserve every connection. They are meant to reveal which connections were built on respect and which were built on your compliance. That is why so many people react badly when you finally say no. Not because you did something wrong, but because your obedience had become part of their comfort. And when comfort is disrupted, true character appears. This is why powerful people do not panic when someone becomes offended by a healthy boundary. They observe it. Because reaction is data. If someone becomes aggressive, manipulative, passive-aggressive, guilt-driven, mocking, or emotionally punishing when you set a reasonable limit, you have just learned something priceless about them. You have learned how they behave when they lose control. That is valuable information. And information is always more useful than fantasy. Now, there is another truth about people that many never fully understand. People test you before they respect you.
How to become mentally untouchable. After all the betrayal, all the disappointment, all the humiliation, all the false hope, all the moments where life forced you to see people, pain, and yourself more clearly, there comes a moment when you must ask one final question. What kind of person will I become after all of this? Because suffering alone does not make you powerful. Pain alone does not make you wise. Experience alone does not make you dangerous. Many people suffer and become bitter. Many people get betrayed and become paranoid. Many people get disappointed and become emotionally fragile. Many people face hardship and become excuses wrapped in victimhood. But the ruthless strategist chooses something rarer. They choose to become forged. Not softer where softness will destroy them. Not louder where noise will expose them. Not harder in a way that kills their humanity, but stronger in a way that makes them difficult to break. And this is the final stage of your reconstruction. You must become mentally untouchable. Not because life will stop testing you. It won't. People will still lie. People will still envy. People will still misunderstand. People will still provoke. People will still disappoint. The world will still reward appearances. And pain will still knock at your door when you least expect it. But the difference is, it will no longer own you. Because there is a kind of strength that cannot be faked. A kind of internal authority that changes the way you walk, decide, respond, build, and survive. And it begins with this truth. Your life changes the moment you stop negotiating with your lower self. This is where most people remain trapped. Not because they lack vision, but because they are ruled by impulse. They wait to feel motivated. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to feel confident. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel emotionally aligned.
And while they wait, life keeps moving. Opportunities pass. Discipline weakens. Potential decays. And years disappear. That is not strategy. That is self-betrayal disguised as patience. The strategist understands something brutally important. If you only move when you feel like it, you will remain a prisoner of your emotions forever. And emotions are unreliable leaders. Some days you will feel powerful. Some days you will feel empty. Some days you will feel focused. Some days you will feel distracted. Some days you will feel fearless. Some days you will feel uncertain. If your actions rise and fall with your mood, your future will always remain unstable. That is why mental untouchability begins with one principle. Discipline must become stronger than emotion. That is where power truly begins. When your standards remain, even when your feelings do not. When your routine survives discomfort. When your focus survives boredom. When your goal survives loneliness. When your self-respect survives temptation. When your principles survive pressure. That is not ordinary strength. That is self-command. And self-command is what separates people who fantasize about transformation from people who actually become transformed. Because no matter how much you understand psychology, strategy, manipulation, or human nature, if you still cannot control your attention, your urges, your habits, your excuses, your emotional cravings, then your mind is still occupied territory. And if your mind is occupied, your destiny can be delayed by your own undisciplined patterns. This is why the ruthless strategist eventually realizes the greatest war is not against the world. It is against internal weakness. Your laziness, your inconsistency, your overthinking, your emotional dependency, your need for comfort, your addiction to distraction, your tendency to self-sabotage when things begin to improve. That is the enemy. And unlike external enemies, this one lives inside your routines, inside your habits, inside the tiny daily compromises that seem harmless in the moment, but slowly shape the quality of your future. This is how most people destroy themselves. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in small repeated acts of self-disrespect. Sleeping on what matters, avoiding what is difficult, scrolling instead of building, complaining instead of preparing, seeking validation instead of mastering skill, talking about change instead of embodying it. And then years later they look around and wonder why life never moved. But life did move. They just moved in circles. This is why if you want to become mentally untouchable, you must become ruthless with your habits. Not obsessed with perfection, but intolerant of repeated self-betrayal. That means there must come a day when you stop saying, "I know what to do, I just need motivation." No, you do not need more motivation. You need a system that survives your moods. You need routines that carry you when your feelings are unstable. You need structure. Because structure is what protects you from the chaos of your lower impulses. And chaos is expensive. It steals years. So if you truly want to rebuild yourself, understand this. Your future is hidden inside your repeated behavior. Not your intentions. Not your fantasies. Not your temporary bursts of inspiration. Your repeated behavior. What do you do when nobody is watching? What do you do when no one is clapping? What do you do when progress is slow? What do you do when you are bored, rejected, lonely, tired, or uncertain? That is who you really are. And if you don't like the answer, good. Because awareness is where power begins. The strategist does not avoid truth. They use it. That is why one of the most powerful things you can ever do is this. Build an identity around self-respect, not emotion. This changes everything. Because when your life is built around emotion, your standards collapse every time discomfort appears. But when your life is built around self-respect, you begin asking a different kind of question. Not, what do I feel like doing today? But, what would the strongest version of me do right now? That question is transformative, because it interrupts impulse. It creates distance between who you are and who you are becoming. And every time you choose according to the stronger identity, you are building psychological authority. That is how mental toughness is formed. Not in one big moment, but in repeated private victories. Waking up when you said you would, finishing what you started, refusing distractions, keeping your word to yourself, maintaining standards even when no one would know if you didn't. This is how confidence is actually built. Not through empty affirmations, not through pretending to feel powerful,
but through evidence. When you repeatedly prove to yourself that you can trust your own discipline, your mind changes. You stop feeling like a fraud. You stop feeling weak. You stop needing so much external reassurance, because your confidence is no longer fantasy. It is memory. Memory of your own consistency. And that kind of confidence is terrifyingly powerful, because once a person learns to trust themselves, they become much harder to control. This is why emotional independence is one of the final signs of real transformation. Not isolation, not coldness, not pretending you need nobody, but freedom from emotional slavery. Freedom from needing constant validation. Freedom from needing to be chosen to feel valuable. Freedom from needing attention to feel alive. Freedom from needing approval to feel legitimate. This is where most people never arrive, because they are still trying to build self-worth from outside inward. From likes, from praise, from attraction, from being wanted, from being admired, from being accepted. But all externally built confidence is fragile, because what other people give, they can withdraw. And if your identity depends on what can be withdrawn, then your peace is permanently unstable. The strategist rejects that weakness. They build inward first, through standards, through discipline, through silence, through resilience, through self-command, through the private evidence of who they have become. And from that place, they stop begging life for worth. They begin carrying it. That is different. That energy changes everything. Because people can feel when someone is no longer starving for validation. They can feel when someone has become inwardly anchored. And whether they admit it or not, they respect it. Even those who envy it. And this is where your presence begins to change in a way words cannot fully explain. You become calmer, more precise, less reactive, less available for nonsense, less impressed by appearances, less tempted by temporary pleasures, less emotionally dependent on unstable people, less distracted by things that once controlled you. And this is what makes you mentally untouchable. Not because you become invincible, but because you become difficult to derail. And that is a far more realistic, powerful form of strength. Because life is not about avoiding every storm. It is about becoming the kind of person who no longer collapses every time one appears. That is maturity. That is strategy. That is power. And eventually, if you continue on this path long enough, you begin to realize something extraordinary. The version of you that once begged for peace can become the version of you that commands it. That is the transformation. From emotional chaos to inner order. From being ruled by feelings to ruling your responses. From being easy to manipulate to difficult to move. From craving validation to carrying self-respect. From surviving life unconsciously to moving through it with intention. That is what it means to rebuild yourself like a ruthless strategist. Not to become evil. Not to become empty. Not to become incapable of love or softness or connection. But to become so internally governed, so psychologically sharpened, so emotionally trained, that your kindness is no longer weakness. Your silence is no longer fear. Your distance is no longer confusion.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Truth 011 for more deep psychological, philosophical, and life-changing content. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.